2. Archducal family meeting. At third bell the next day, we Archduke candidates left the northern building with all of our guard knights, plus one scholar and attendant each. The situation was definitely being treated with more caution than was normal. Instead of our usual meeting room, we were gathering in the one closest of all to the northern building. Sylvester, Florencia, Bonifacius, Wilfrid, Charlotte, and I all went inside. Melkor and his retainers now took the spot that had once belonged to Ferdinand. Thus began our meeting. There's a lot to report this time, Sylvester said. First, Florencia's pregnancy. We expect her to give birth either around the end of summer or the start of autumn. I want to distribute our current workload with her inevitable ill health in mind. His announcement caused a stir. This was going to complicate both the plan for him to take a second wife and administration as a whole. So he actually is going to take a second wife. If he actually is, that sucks. But while everyone was exchanging looks of concern, I didn't even blink. I already knew about Florencia's pregnancy, so I took the opportunity to extend words of celebration. Congratulations, I said to her. I look forward to autumn. I thank you ever so much, Rosemine, she replied, her expression softening into a smile. Melkor beamed and spoke up as well. Congratulations, Mother. This means I'm getting a little brother or sister, right? Yep, Sylvester replied on her behalf, then gazed across all the gathered retainers. But keep it a secret for now, all right? Charlotte had been looking down at her feet, her expression stiff, but she finally looked up again in an apparent show of resolve. We would not wish to put Mother in danger, she said. We will keep this a secret, and I will provide all the support I can. I appreciate that. Now moving on. I want to focus next on the purge carried out over the winter. We all understand that getting Ehrenfest back on its feet is our highest priority, yeah? And so the reports began. The purge had started earlier than planned after Matthias and the others gave us an urgent update, and those who were found to have been given their names to Georgine were targeted first. The most notable raid was on Geeb Gerlach's estate. Many of the people there had committed suicide, and only a few of them had been registered as Ehrenfest nobles. Father, I don't understand, Wilfrid said. Does that mean there was a large group of people from outside Ehrenfest in Geeb Gerlach's estate? You know how your mana is registered to a medal when you're baptized, right? The mana from those medals can be compared to the mana from a noble's corpse to confirm their background. In this case, there was a number of corpses that we couldn't identify. His phrasing sent a shudder down my spine, but I already had an idea of who those corpses might have once been. Perhaps they were devouring soldiers. They were used when I was ambushed and Charlotte kidnapped, correct? There had also been the time when, after visiting Gerlach during my first spring baptism, or first spring prayer as a shrine maiden, Tully and I were almost kidnapped in the lower city. And the time when the Grey Priests were abducted. Right, Sylvester said. The soldiers who exploded when attacking Charlotte's baptism ceremony were also unidentifiable. We expect them to be the same. Did Geeb Gerlach explode too? I asked, looking at Bonifacius, who had charged into his winter estate. Somehow I find that hard to believe. Bonifacius frowned. The situation led me to conclude that he did, but I did not see it with my own eyes. The thing is, I went to charge in and grab him with my staff, but I was told that it would be too aggressive. And, of course, the butler at the door tried to keep us from going in at all. That gave the Geeb all the time he needed. By the time we reached the room where he was holding his meeting, it was all up in flames. There was nothing left inside but burning flesh. Although his explanation was quite bare, the state of the room sounded so nightmarish that I didn't even want to imagine it. Part of me had wanted to cover my ears when he started telling us how the butler had also exploded the moment Bonifacius charged at the doorway. But I ended up listening anyway, rubbing my goosebumps-covered arms while trying to fend off the gory visuals. We compared our medals with whatever limbs still remained, but several of them couldn't be identified. We were found a left hand with Geeb Gerlach's ring and that crest, and that did respond to a medal. But I don't buy that it was really him. There had to be more to it. There was far too little left behind. Bonifacius' warrior instincts meant he was skeptical, but after seeing this thing with his own eyes, he still wasn't confident that Geeb Gerlach was dead. Is it possible that he just cut off his hand and ran away? Wilfrid asked. Bonifacius crossed his arms and grunted. I could tell from the smell of the blood and the warmth of the corpses that I got in there right after he exploded. The estate was surrounded by knights who didn't see any fleeing high beasts, and escaping through the sewers with its mana-eaters would be next to impossible for a noble. We also had commoner soldiers watching all other exits, and we received no reports of any of them getting hurt or acting suspiciously. Sylvester nodded. I raised the city's barrier to its maximum strength so that no nobles will be able to escape, assigned knights to even the northern gate, and told the commoner guards not to let a single carriage or wagon through. The reports say that no high beast or carriages left Ehrenfest that day, but even with that much evidence, Bonifacius hadn't been able to accept that Geeb Gerlach was dead. Bonifacius was still doubtful, so we took the medals of all those Matthias confirmed were names sworn to Georgine and carried out formal executions. You mean the God of Darkness method? I asked timidly, recalling the executions in Haas. It was one of the spells I had learned when Ferdinand was helping me cram for the Archduke candidate course. Despite my vague description, there were people here who weren't Archduke candidates, so I needed to be careful. Sylvester seemed to understand. He nodded, his expression stern. But I thought the spell wouldn't work on those out of the Ob's realm of control, or not in the Ob's realm of control. Rosemont, how could someone escape Ehrenfest if not by high beast or a carriage? I paused to consider the abrupt question. A teleportation circle, maybe? Guy Gerlach wouldn't have been able to use one, Sylvester answered exasperated. Magic circles that can teleport people requires the Ob's authority. I'd also heard as much from Ferdinand when he was teaching me about magic circles. Human teleportation was so consequential that only Obs can make and operate the means to it. Anyway, he said, moving the conversation along, we used the medals that matched corpses found on the estate to carry out the executions. Guy Gerlach, real name Grossum, is dead. I want us to move forward on that basis. Our problem right now is figuring out whether other nobles are name-sworn. The process tends to be carried out in secret, and while the names that Matthias gave us seem to have been accurate, even their memories were distorted from Trug. Continuing our investigation hasn't been easy. As things stood, they had no choice but to make guesses based on the criminals' associations. It was a precarious situation. They needed to be very careful not to execute any innocents. Ah, that reminds me, Sylvester said. Rosamund, Wilfrid, Charlotte. As part of their investigation, the Knights Order will need to borrow those who gave their names to you. As it turned out, they specifically wanted children of the Giebs who have sworn themselves to Georgine, Guy Gerlach, Wilfrid and Bessel, or Wiltord and Bessel, were given special mention. Sylvester continued, after the purge, the Order began inspecting the Giebs' summer estates, but such mansions are teeming with doors that only open for the registered family members. Those hidden rooms and such will have become completely inaccessible once new Giebs are assigned, so we want to investigate them before then. Re-registering my mana with a hidden room in the orphanage director's chambers would cause my old room to be lost forevermore. In the same vein, if the Giebs were replaced and the registrations redone, several places in their estates would become inaccessible. I understand why it's urgent for the estates to be investigated, I said, then shot Karstedt a very deliberate look. I will instruct Matthias, Lorenz, and Muriella to cooperate with the Knights Order, so please treat them well. They are my retainers now. He nodded with a reliable smile. I will make sure the Knights are well aware. Of course, we will treat those serving Lord Wilfrid and Lady Charlotte with just as much consideration. Then his features began to harden, and a stern light arose in his light blue eyes. But in return, we ask you, their lord or ladies, to stress that they are not to hide the crimes of their families. Understood, I replied, aware that they would need to cooperate if they wanted to survive. Wilfrid and Charlotte nodded as well. Moving on, Sylvester said, as an adult myself, it pains me to admit this, but... He trailed off, then very wearily tapped a stack of boards. Ehrenfest has spent such a long time at the bottom of the rankings that not many of us know how to interact with top-ranking duchies. You know that, yeah? We're now so high up that we need to start acting like a top-ranking duchy ourselves. Again, we nodded. We had been made well aware of all this during our time at the Royal Academy. However, he continued, the purge has left Ehrenfest with even fewer nobles, and the rest are now plotting to secure the positions left by those who are imprisoned. We need to prioritize getting our internals in order now, changing how we deal with other duchies. As he said, the execution of several Giebs in such quick succession meant the remaining nobles were now jostling for their titles. It was hardly a good time to be focused elsewhere. We know how hard you kids are working. Even among the chaos of the purge, the three of you managed to unify the dorm and raise our grades and rank even higher than before. However, pathetically enough, we adults can't keep up with you. That's why we all want you to hold our current position in the Royal Academy, or even knock us down to 10th. My jaw dropped in sheer disbelief. I'd assumed that the adults would do their best to match our new ranking in Jurgensmith, but here they were even humoring the idea of climbing back down a little. Is that really what you all want, I asked? During our time at the Royal Academy, we had divided ourselves into teams and all worked so hard to improve our duchy's position. I could still picture the students' proud smiles after their professors had praised their high grades. And what about our retainers? They had all run themselves ragged, using trial and error to figure out how to properly manage Ehrenfest's new place among the top-ranking duchies. How could I ask them to cast all that aside, all of their hard work? Rosemine, Karstedt said from where he was standing behind Sylvester, looking noticeably bitter. This is the will of your support base, of the Lies Gangs. The Lies Gangs? Yes, the purge was carried out early, and almost all of our duchy's most powerful Ahrensbach-associated nobles were removed from their posts or eliminated. Satisfied that his lifetime rivals had at last met a grisly end, Gebe Lysgang and Meritus climbed the towering stairway to the distant heights. My eyes widened. Great-grandfather has gone to the distant heights? Yep, he's finally dead. He was finally at peace, confident in his belief that you were sent from the gods to aid Lysgang. His last request was for you to become Ab after his passing. Not happening. I thought back to my last meeting with Gebe Lysgang and Meritus, who had come across as a ball of extreme hatred and resentment toward Ahrensbach and Veronica. My assumption had been that he calmed down after speaking with Wilfried and making their promise, but apparently not. It was pretty disturbing to hear that he died of pure glee over the purge, which he had said was thanks to me, and that even in his dying breath he had asked for me to rule Ehrenfest. Father, what does his passing have to do with our duchy's ranking? Wilfried asked, confused. Florencia cast her eyes down a little. His climb to the distant heights means that we no longer have to oppose the Vorn Veronica faction. Our need to climb the ranks to defeat Ahrensbach has disappeared. From this point forward, we will need to devote ourselves to sorting out our internal matters. And, given the pressure that Ehrenfest is already under, the Lysgangs believe that nobody will rejoice over our rank rising even further. I'd already known that the adults were struggling to keep up, but it was a surprise to hear them say that nobody would appreciate our progress. Do you mean to say we shouldn't have worked together at the Royal Academy to boost our rankings? My efforts to improve Ehrenfest's position hadn't been for the sake of the Lysgangs. It was just a good way to unify the dorm and make sure that Ferdinand wasn't looked down upon in Ahrensbach, but after asking me to help our duchy climb the rankings, Sylvester was telling me to drop it back down to 10th. How was I even supposed to respond to that? You said that because Ferdinand is in Ahrensbach, serving as a tutor for Lady Letizia, Ehrenfest needs to work hard too, didn't you? This may sound a bit extreme, Sylvester said to me, but you're the only one who's actively interacting with top-ranking duchies and forming connections with the royal family. The nobles believe that if you tone things down, our rank will stop going up. Dude, didn't you ask Anastasius to not raise your rank this year? Didn't you not have to worry about that? Hello? Can't you just ask him not to raise your rank anymore until, things have calmed down with Ehrenfest? Why can't you do that? In other words, you stood out too much. You're continually coming first in class and getting closer with royalty. If you do any more, we're going to face unnecessary conflict over who should become the next Ob. We want you to act very carefully from now on. He was basically saying that it was better for me not to work hard. Was that why Ferdinand hadn't praised me this year? Because my achievements had caused Ehrenfest more trouble than anything? The moment that occurred to me, my excitement about having come first in class and the celebration I'd seen from atop the stage started to fade away. The world around me was losing its color. The Gebes who have spoken with you know that you don't want to become that Ob, Sylvester said, but everyone else seems to think that you do. You have no choice but to prove them wrong. So, to prevent any weird disputes over who should be the next Ob, I need to keep myself out of the spotlight. Would it be better if I wasn't here at all? Don't be thinking that, dude. The pride I took in my duties, my desire to work hard, it felt like those integral parts of me were shriveling up and dying. I wanted to lock myself away in my library so that people would stop complaining about everything I did. Well, good, I said with a smile. My absence when the factions are shifting and rewards and punishments are being divvied out will surely change their perspective. I entrust getting Ehrenfest in order and controlling the noble population to you and Wilfrid, the current and future Obs. It really was for the best. After all, once I was at my library at the temple, which had the added benefit of being so close to the lower city, I wouldn't have the motivation to do much else. Wilfrid nodded and said, right, I'll focus on settling the chaos in the castle and noble society as a whole and get them to recognize me as the next Ob in the process. He was accepting his new duty with a dazzling smile. Do you not think something about being told that everyone's hard work in the Royal Academy was for nothing? That we've been asked to give up the rank we all worked so hard to secure? We are both part of the same conversation, so how was he giving such a hope-filled smile? It was too bizarre to understand, but whatever. I continued to unload all my burdens. I went to the Royal Academy's library and copied out the schematics for the stage and the magic circle used in the spring ritual. The two of you may use them for the sake of your faction. At this point, I was just getting rid of anything that might get me called back to the castle. But rather than turn his nose up at the extra work, Wilfrid rejoiced and thanked me. You are both helping me ever so much, I said. How can I focus on the temple in the lower city? This was a win for us all, or so I thought. Sylvester shook his head at me with a troubled frown. No, we want you to take on Florencia's duties while she's dealing with her pregnancy. He was asking me to start unifying the female nobles while socializing in tea parties and propping up Wilfrid as his fiancé. To be honest, I wasn't crazy about doing any of that. Now that Ferdinand was gone, there was nobody I could consult about temple work, and I really wasn't sure whether the temple could function with just my retainers. Plus, now that there was no need for me to work hard, in the Royal Academy, I didn't have the slightest bit of motivation to attend any annoying tea parties. Maybe I should make a few very deliberate mistakes to lower our rank. I understand why these tasks would normally fall to me, because I'm engaged to Wilfred, but Charlotte is much better suited to socializing and administrative work. I would rather focus on my duties as the High Bishop, overseeing the orphanage and directing the merchants. I really couldn't afford to slack when it came to preparing to host more merchants from other duchies. If we revealed to them that our internals were such a mess right now, our interduchy relations would surely suffer. Sylvester thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "You're right. Even now, I'll still work hard for everyone in the lower city." As I worked on pulling my scattered feelings back together, focusing in particular on my promise with Dad, Wilfred started pointing at Sylvester. "Father, don't be so lenient with Rosamund," he said. "She needs to hurry up and get more socializing experience for next year at the Royal Academy." I decided not to say what was really on my mind. Why the heck should I bother when I don't need to give two hoots about our ranking? And instead gave him a ladylike tilt on my head. But who will take care of all the temple work and business with the Merchants Guild if not I? Surely I'm not expected to do everything. I had only recently been put in charge of the temple work, and our scholars weren't yet capable of understanding the lower city merchants' intentions. We were so lacking in competent manpower that I wanted to weep openly about having lost justice. I was the only one who could do this work. "I can understand you being needed in the temple, but why can't you lead the Merchants Guild to the scholars?" Wilfred asked. "They dealt with them before, didn't they? Getting more socializing experience is far more important, especially with next year in mind. It was only because I was actively balancing the needs of the nobles with the realities of the merchants that we were getting by at all. How, then, had he convinced himself that we could entrust things to the old scholars? It was clear as day that they would ignore the common circumstances, make unreasonable demands, and ultimately cause everything to blow up in their faces." "I wonder which scholars are you referring to?" I replied. "Surely not the ones who are incapable of adjusting to our new rank and who continue to work with the mindset of a bottom-ranking duchy. Not even Hartmut, who is very skilled at speaking with lower city commoners, has the knowledge and experience necessary for business discussions. He would struggle to negotiate without me there. So if we have race scholars, then whom we can entrust with such matters, then this is my first time hearing of them. I would even welcome such unique talent as my retainers." "Well, I mean," Wilfred stuttered, his eyes wandering around the room. Evidently there were no such scholars. As I glared at Wilfred, Charlotte heaved an exasperated sigh. "Wilfred, I understand your wish for Rosamund to secure more experience, but she makes an excellent point. I can take her place and socialize with other noblewomen, but no one else is equipped to manage the temple and cooperate with merchants. I will serve as Mother's representative in her stead." "Oh, Charlotte, you're so smart and considerate. To think I was going to hole up in my library in the temple." She was dazzling and so very reliable. It made me feel a little guilty for not wanting to work hard anymore. "Charlotte," Florencia said, "getting Rosamund to socialize more is our highest priority. Even the reports we received made it clear that interacting with other nobles is her greatest weakness at the moment." I could tell that I'd caused her plenty of headaches and immediately averted my eyes, feeling awkward. In contrast to my own reactions, Charlotte began to grimace. She looked from me to Wilfred to Sylvester to Florencia, then gazed down and said, "Now that Uncle is gone, there's so much more to be done. Temple work, managing the orphanage, which has grown in size due to the purge, negotiating with the merchants, transporting the Gutenbergs, serving as an advisor for the printing industry. There is so much that only Rosamund can do, and she already has more to balance than most adults, let alone other students. You snubbed her hard work at the Royal Academy, and now you want her to obtain more socializing experience? How will she find the time when you won't even give her any extra manpower? And on top of all that, you expect her to take Mother's place? Every single one of you is in the wrong. Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte, for standing up for this." She finally looked up again, her indigo eyes now scathingly critical. "I do not believe for a moment that learning to socialize is Rosamund's highest priority. Mother, Father, you are both healthy and young enough to be having a new child. We have at least a decade before Rosamund will need to start serving as the first wife and fulfilling all the relative duties." "Thank you. Have her do socializing as a secondary thing in the Royal Academy. Have her focus on getting what she has to do done, because more than likely y'all will be here at least 10 years from now, before you guys even have to started being the next Ob and the first wife. Hello, she could socialize then, when she's done at the Royal Academy." Charlotte? I was touched that she would get so angry for my sake. My world seemed to get just a little bit brighter. I took a moment to relish my newly restored optimism. Right, I'll continue working hard for just a little bit longer. And while I was reveling in delight, everyone else was staring at Charlotte in shock. She was being openly critical of not just Wilfred, but the Archducal couple as well. Still, that did nothing to slow her. With a quiet countenance, she continued expressing her opinions. "Father, it was clear to you that the purge would put Interfest in very dire straits, yet you continued to refuse a second wife, and even impregnated Mother on top of that. If anyone should need to take Mother's place, it should be us, her blood relatives. I see no reason why Rosamund should need to pick up the pieces. In truth, I did think it was a shame that Sylvester, who had married the woman he loved, was now being asked to take a second wife entirely for political reasons. For his sake, I even hoped it would never come to that. I also had no qualms about him having another baby. The extent of my reaction to that news was nice. Charlotte didn't share my opinions, however. She was born and raised as a purebred member of the Archducal family, so she had an entirely different perspective when it came to second wives. She felt anger and scorn toward our Archduke, who had chosen to impregnate his first wife yet again, when he was still refusing to take a second. Also, she continued, how are we going to fulfill our agreement with Groschel when Mother is pregnant? One of my retainers is from Groschel, and as I understand it, we are due to perform an Entwicklung there this spring. Entwicklungs were large-scale spells with the power to reform an entire city. Casting one required so much mana that the entire Archducal family would need to chug rejuvenation potions, and while the lower city in Groschel was smaller than the one in Ehrenfest, it was still sure to be a costly endeavor. We're already a man down because Ferdinand's gone, and now Florencia's not going to be able to do it because she's pregnant and is going to have to put mana into her baby. So we're already down 2 people here. Yeah, we already had been 1 man down now that Ferdinand was in Ahrensbach, but Florencia needing to provide mana for her baby would make the original schedule that much harder to stick to. Sylvester paused. Spring might not be feasible anymore, but we could manage in time for autumn. For something on the scale of an Entwicklung, no mistakes can be permitted. The nobles in Groschel are already on a knife edge. Do you truly expect them to be able to prepare for next summer's merchants? After such a sudden change of plans, Charlotte asked. Judging by the confidence with which she spoke, she already discussed the matter with her Groschel retainer. She continued, still glaring at Sylvester. I do not wish to see my retainer suffer. Rosamund, you also have a Groschel noble in your service, do you not? You are also more knowledgeable about merchants in lower cities than anyone else here. Will changing the date of the Entwicklung truly be acceptable? I started racking my brain, desperate to meet my little sister's expectations. Brunhilde had already told me how things were going in Groschel. I'd even been there before. They wouldn't be entirely incapable of preparing. Groschel had sent its craftspeople to train in Ehrenfest when it was adopting the printing and papermaking industries. It already had connections with the Gutenbergs, and by communicating with the printing guild, could prepare shops for books and paper at a moment's notice. Plus, presumably at Brunhilde's direction, it had been working with the Gilberta Company to create more stores that dealt primarily in hair ornaments. The problems were that it fundamentally lacked enough inns to support merchants from other duchies, and its lower city was outright filthy. Even after an Entwicklung, it was unknown whether the people there would manage to keep things clean. We have made all the preparations necessary to open their stores, I said. The main questions are whether they will be able to establish their inns and keep the city clean. Bear in mind that they will need to sort out furniture and other interior decorations, secure and train personnel. Giving them half a year less to get everything ready would disturb things enormously. Entwicklung could only be used to make plain white buildings, meaning they wouldn't have furniture, wooden frames, or even doors at all at first. That was why the current schedule was for the spell to be cast in spring, the exteriors to be sorted out during summer and autumn, and the furniture to be made over the winter. Postponing the Entwicklung to autumn would create all sorts of chaos, and it seemed unreasonable to expect the craftspeople to work outside in all the snow. Under those circumstances, would it even be possible for Groschel to furnish all the buildings and supply them with trained personnel in time for the following summer? Not likely. You believe so too? Charlotte asked. Back when my room in the northern building was being prepared, it took us 2 years to choose the specialist craftspeople we needed and arrange the necessary carpets, curtains, furniture, and so on. It is hard to imagine that performing the Entwicklung in autumn will give Groschel enough time to prepare for the merchants coming in the following summer. Of course, furniture and rooms for commoner merchants wouldn't take anywhere near as long to prepare as furniture and rooms for a member of the Archducal family. After my experience of both the monastery and the Italian restaurant, however, I understood that carpentry workshops still needed plenty of time to finish such jobs. As I was thinking of ways we could save more time, Wilfred peered from Charlotte, who was getting into her stride, to Florencia, who was looking quite unwell. We will still need to change our plans, Charlotte, he snapped. The Entwicklung requires too much mana for Mother to participate. Do you want to put her in danger? That isn't my intention at all, she retorted. I simply fear that Groschel will criticize the Archducal family for changing the plan to meet our own needs. Should we not try to avoid provoking them when the duchy is already so unstable from the purge? She was right. Forcing unreasonable demands on the Groschel now of all times would inevitably provoke the Liesgang faction. Sylvester's go-to method of pushing his work onto those below him would only lead us into a classic pitfall. Father, if you wish to avoid backlash from Groschel and the Liesgang faction, you must promise not to make any new business deals during the upcoming Archduke Conference. Charlotte concluded. Sylvester and his retainers grimaced. They were sure to be questioned about this year's business deals. or business loss, and which duchies they would go to. Ehrenfest's abrupt rise to the rankings meant we wanted to stay in everyone's good graces, so it was going to be rough having to turn down so many interested parties. Charlotte Wilfrid said, we need to prioritize interduchy relations over appeasing the Lieskings. The royal family told us to rethink how we deal with other duchies. He made a good point. The Lieskings were Ehrenfest nobles, meaning it was possible to quash their protests using Sylvester's authority as the Archduke. But that solution wouldn't work on other duchies. It made sense that Wilfrid was more conscious of this fact than Charlotte was, since Anastasis had directly warned him about it. It certainly is scary to think of making enemies out of other duchies as well as the Liesgangs. In its current state, Ehrenfest needed to satisfy other duchies as well as its known nobles. If this was a negative consequence of our new rank, then perhaps I needed to take responsibility for it. I know that keeping our own nobles in order is important, I said, but interduchy relations are important too, right? Yes, Sylvester answered. In that case, I think we should focus on making Groschel usable by next summer. Though this will require you, the Archduke, to take the lead. You cannot simply leave the matter to Guy Groschel. Trying to pass the buck would be disastrous. If everything ended up falling apart, then Groschel would receive all the blame. Having the Archduke be accountable instead was sure to smooth things over. What are you saying? Sylvester exclaimed wide-eyed. You would have the Archduke take responsibility for Groschel? Florencia asked, looking equally as surprised. I would. We're borrowing its lower city because our own isn't large enough to host all the merchants. If the Archduke is willing to take responsibility for the preparations, then Charlotte's fears should be taken care of, no? To be more specific, Charlotte was worried that Groschel wouldn't be able to follow the new, unreasonable schedule, and would end up being blamed for the failure, which would cause backlash and further destabilize Ehrenfest. Charlotte nodded and said that she was also worried about my workload getting too excessive, which was very cute. She then carefully eyed Sylvester, awaiting his response. Rose, Sylvester muttered, wilting beneath the stern, silent look from his daughter. If you are going to vastly modify the schedule based on personal circumstances, then you should also be ready to provide your full support. The preparations won't be completed in time if you lead this to Groschel, but if you provide most of the mana and funding while offering to accept the blame for any failures, you might just be able to manage. Oh-ho, and how is that? Sylvester asked, clapping a hand on his cheek before leaning forward intrigued. Now that I had his attention, I decided to launch into my explanation. Scholars need to make precise schematics for the end to account, correct? In particular, we'll need diagrams for the ends. If we can get those and work out the precise measurements, we can order the doors, window frames, and other such things well in advance from separate carpentry workshops. We had an enormous order on our hands, and exclusivity culture would only slow things down. Though I understood that it was important for the lower city craftsmen to have regular customers and a steady supply of work, it would really get in the way in times like this. I continued, half a year should be enough time for a workshop to complete the interior decorations for a single room. And if we ask for the doors and window frames to be prioritized, we have those to put in place immediately after the Entwickeln. The craftsmen will work even harder if we make them compete with one another and reward those who do the best. Getting the doors and window frames made first was key. If we waited until after winter, snow would sweep into all the newly built homes and create a huge mess, which would only delay things further. That said, I went on, the workshops in Groschel won't have enough builders and carpenters to complete everything in time. We'll also need to send orders to the provinces surrounding it and to our own lower city. That is one of many reasons why I think the Ob should take charge. Guy Groschel asking another Guy would turn into a disaster depending on what they wanted in return, but an archducal order would smooth all that over. There was a glint in Sylvester's dark green eyes which brought an immediate smile to my face. His expression was that of someone who had just found the path to victory. The problem from there is going to be the furniture, I said. Just as Charlotte fears, Groschel will need to rely on carpentry workshops, and there simply wouldn't be enough time for them to prepare furniture for every room. We cannot afford to settle for half measures either. The visiting merchants are going to be from some of the wealthiest in all the top-ranking duchies, and their tastes are bound to be just as rich. But with the Ob himself at the helm, that won't be an issue. How so? You're responsible for the estates and nobles crushed during the purge, are you not? Simply confiscate the furniture. We'll already be using a different workshop for each inn, so having a variety of styles shouldn't be an issue. And think about how much money it will save us. It would also save us all the tedious bureaucracy of needing to budget for, inquire, and pass down the furniture. Furthermore, I said, unlike instruments or magic tools, the furniture taken from the nobles' estates won't be needed by the children who avoided punishment. They were going to be living in the orphanage, the castle playroom, or somewhere in the dormitories, all places that were already furnished. I continued, we'll also need to account for the time it will take to train personnel. If we move the potential new workers from Groschel to our lower city as soon as possible, they can start getting some fun hands-on experience. Coordinating the move wouldn't be easy, but it would give those from Groschel an entire half year of experience doing business with merchants from other duchies. Meanwhile, our lower city would receive extra manpower during such a busy season. Or busy period. It seemed like a beneficial arrangement for both parties. It is my duty to make such arrangements with the merchants, so you may leave this to me, I concluded, assuming that you'll take responsibility as the ob that is. After a short pause, Sylvester said, "All right, I'll do it." Florencia looked from her husband to me, concerned, while Wilfred stared down at the floor with pursed lips. Charlotte muttered that in the end, I still ended up having more work thrust upon me. I cackled a little. "Thank you for worrying about me, Charlotte, but I've been told to stay in the shadows. As such, while these are my suggestions, the ob will be the one actually carrying them out." Charlotte's eyes widened a little, then she smiled and let out an amused giggle. "Now I can hide away in the temple and get more opportunities to see everyone in the lower city. All according to plan." It was then that Melkor, who had been listening in silence, suddenly shot his hand up. "Sister, is there anything I can do? I want to be useful to Ehrenfest too." "Well, could you assist me then, Melkor?" "Of course," he replied, smiling brightly. "What do you need me to do?" To be honest, there wasn't really anything Melkor could do. He couldn't provide mana because he hadn't been taught how to control it, and it didn't seem feasible to bring him to religious ceremonies. Still, it was best to encourage his motivation, even if he himself couldn't be of much use. The retainers with him at all times were another story. These are people who could take over, who could assist me with my temple work. "You can study the details of temple work," I said. "You will need to be ready to serve as the High Bishop by the time I come of age, will you not? The purge means we have even fewer blue priests than before, so preparing my successor was more important than ever. Otherwise, the temple would outright collapse when I came of age and departed with all my retainers." "Oh, definitely." "Sorting out my successor should also give me more time to spend in my library. I will take over training Melkor and his retainers," I declared. Sylvester grimaced at the very idea and muttered, "That's one way to make me worry about his future." His reluctance was irrelevant, though. Somebody needed to train my successor, and nobody was better suited to the position than I, especially when we are already so short-handed. "Lady Rosamund, would you really send our lord to the temple straight after his baptism?" asked one of the people in Melkor's service. They didn't let it show on their faces, but he and some of his fellow retainers, particularly the older ones, seemed less than pleased with the idea. "I was made High Bishop immediately after my baptism," I replied, unwilling to let such valuable manpower slip through my fingers. "In my case, I was raised in the temple. I could rely on Lord Ferdinand to help me with my work and train my retainers. But who will provide this support to Melkor? My retainers are unlikely to stay in the temple after I come of age." I shot Hartman a glance. He smiled in response, requested permission to speak with Melkor and his retainers, and then said, "Indeed, we should start his training as soon as possible. Lady Rosamund is the only person whom I will serve, and my intention is to leave the temple as soon as she does. Only 3 years remain before Lord Melkor is due to become the High Bishop. Are you all prepared to support him then?" Melkor recoiled and stared at his retainers. 3 years, he muttered, then turned to Sylvester and said, "Father, I want to help my sister in the temple. There's nothing I can do here in the castle, but I'm a nurse to Canada too. I want to be of some assistance." Wait a minute. Melkor is probably, 7, almost 8 at this point? Surely he'll be starting at the Royal Academy in 3 years, or already be at the Royal Academy in 3 years, depending on if he's 7 or 8. So he's going to have to prioritize coming home for the dedication ritual, so like Rosamund, so he's not going to be able to do much socializing like she did. Okay, so this would actually possibly work. "All right," Sylvester eventually said, caving. "Melkor, I hereby order you and your retainers to help in the temple." Melkor's older retainers grimaced, but the knights seemed quite interested. My mana compression method aside, they had probably heard the students back from the Royal Academy talking about getting divine protections through prayer. "Let's work hard together, Melkor." "Right." From there, our meeting came to a close. Melkor was the only one to stand up with a bright smile. Everyone else appeared to be swallowing some very bitter remarks. Sylvester, Florencia, and their retainers looked particularly unwell, likely because of the mountain of work that awaited them, while Wilfred and Charlotte seemed to be brooding over something. Bonifacius strode to the door, ignoring the heavy atmosphere entirely. He then stopped, waved to me, and said, "Rosamund, what do you need?" "What you need is some archducal work in the castle. If you want to leave the temple, just ask for me for help." "Huh?" A stir ran through the room. Sylvester, Florencia, and Wilfred all tensed up. Our meeting was supposed to be over, but now we were getting drawn back into it. In truth, my mind was already elsewhere. I only had 3 years before my coming of age, so I was thinking about how to train scholars to do business with merchants and how to plan for Fran's and my other attendants' futures. As a result, I responded without even trying to sugarcoat my feelings. "If you wish to help me, grandfather, then make it so that I can remain in the temple forever, even after coming of age." "What? What the fuck, dude? You have to pay attention to what you're saying!" Sylvester and the others loosened up at once, but Bonifacius went rigid with shock. I cocked my head at him, unsure why he was so surprised, but he simply took his leave with a somewhat saddened expression. "Oh! Is that kind of defeating the purpose of him wanting her to be the Ob? Oh, nice! Nice one, Rosamund. You kind of defeated that without even noticing it. Maybe. Poor guy. Still, though, she doesn't need to be the op here. Melkor preparing for the temple. Rosamund, what can I expect now that I'm helping out in the temple? Melkor asked, the instant we left the meeting room and started making our way back to the northern building. His indigo eyes sparkling with excitement for his new job, and it brought me peace to see him so motivated. Your life in the castle will stay mostly the same, I replied, but you'll be working at the temple between 3rd and 5th bells. Traveling under Retainer's High Beach should make the commute much easier. As for your tasks, you can memorize words of prayer in the High Priest chambers and offer up your mana. You won't be able to participate in this year's spring prayer since you haven't yet learned to control your mana, but if you start practicing now, then you might be able to help with the Harvest Festival in autumn. Right. The plan had always been for Melkor to practice mana replenishment with Bonifacius during the Spring Archduke Conference, then participate in the Harvest Festival. In other words, the only difference here was that he would memorize prayers in the temple instead of the castle. You're going to be working to your existing schedule for the most part, I noted, but it really is important that you come to the temple and offer your mana to the gods. Hoping to make Melkor's older retainers more receptive to sending their lord off to the temple, I started to explain how one obtained more divine protections at the Royal Academy depending on how often one prayed and the amount of mana one offered to the gods. This was now common knowledge among the students, but I wasn't sure whether it had reached the older generations. Through our joint research with Dunkelfelger, we demonstrated that people who pray regularly and offer up lots of mana receive more divine protections, I said. Drawonko seems to have begun looking into the most efficient way to obtain protections, and our plan for next year is to research religious ceremonies and harvests with Fremmeltak. These developments, coupled with the royal family's participation in the dedication ritual we held at the Royal Academy, have brought a lot more attention to the temple and religious ceremonies. Ehrenfest knows more about these things than any other duchy, and my hope is that we'll start taking more pride in that fact. Oh ho! The older retainers' expressions changed. As expected, being stuck in the northern building due to the purge meant that they hadn't known much of what was happening outside. It probably hadn't helped that most of Melkor's student retainers were from lower grades, specifically so that they can continue serving him after he himself enrolled. I did my best to show the value of the temple so that Melkor's retainers will be more open to their lord going there. I wanted to make them more cooperative and improve their attitude toward the Grey Priest, which would make them easier to deal with. Melkor, do you know that Wilfrid was gifted divine protections from 12 gods, I asked? That was because he, unlike other Archduke candidates, participated in Spring Prayer and the Harvest Festival. Yes, he replied. Mother found out from one of our reports and told me over dinner. Father said that you earned even more protections, Rosamund. They told me to work hard so that I could earn plenty like you. Wait, what? Like me? That gave me pause. His phrasing seemed to suggest the Archducal couple was pleased about my divine protections, but they had said the complete opposite during our meeting. If I participate in religious ceremonies like you and Wilfrid do, will I be able to attain divine protections too, he asked. Indeed, performing duties in the temple will also help. I intend to look into whether those who have already done the ritual can perform it again here in Ehrenfest. My retainers were all praying in preparation for this. And once the Garnets and the other Archducal candidates all perked up, the divine protections ritual can be repeated, they asked. Melkor's retainer nodded and said, We have been told that the graduating students who participated in our joint research were given a second chance. It seemed that they were aware that some graduates, such as Lenore and Lazetta, had managed to get extra protections. We haven't yet done any experiments, I said, so I am unsure whether we will see any success, but I plan to begin my research with my adult retainers. Obtaining many divine protections improves the efficiency of one's mana, so it should benefit even those who have finished their growth period and struggle to increase their mana through compression. This topic wasn't of much interest to Melkor, who still had mana compression and a growth period ahead of him, but I was captivating his adult retainers. They were older than Cornelius' generation, and the growth periods had already come and gone by the time my compression method was first being spread. Of course, they would still receive some benefit from my method, but the younger generations were already ahead. The older adults had presumably been worried that this new revelation about divine protections would make the chasm even wider, but their eyes now gleamed at the thought of getting to repeat the ritual. I continued, but even if you do repeat the ritual, you will not receive any new protections unless you pray to the gods and offer your mana. My retainers do this already, and are unlikely to encounter any issues as a result, but the same cannot be said for those who have done nothing of the sort. Without missing a beat, Melkor's retainers began appealing to their lord. Lord Melkor, do bring me with you to the temple. No, by all means bring me. It was good to see them all so eager to go to the temple, even though serving Wilfrid and Charlotte were listening with great interest. I gave a satisfied nod that suggested that Melkor's retainers come up with a rotating schedule. No matter how much they all wanted to go to the temple, the guard knights also needed to train with the Knights Order. They would need to take turns. Lady Rosamund, how do your retainers do it? They asked, and while Cornelius began to explain, Hartman smiled at me. Lady Rosamund, he said, I understand your need to convey the importance of visiting the temple, but there are other arrangements we must mention. I was able to use the High Priest's chambers as they were when I took over from Lord Ferdinand, but Lord Melkor will need to make some additional preparations before he can enter the temple. Would you care to elaborate? Melkor's attendant asked. Melkor was also looking at us, especially curious. I'd simply inherited the orphanage director's chambers, and all the preparations for my room had been made while I was being baptized in the nobles' quarter. Now that I thought about it, though, preparing an entire room really was a huge endeavor. I mused, blue priests from lay nobles and med-noble families should have some leftover furniture in the temple, and we could use that to prepare a room at once. However, I was made to order brand new furniture when I was adopted, so I doubt Melkor, a fellow Archduke candidate, would be able to use hand-me-down stuff either. Is the plan for Lord Melkor to visit the temple immediately after the feast celebrating spring? The attendant asked, worried. There wasn't much time until then. Milady, not everything needs to be newly made, Riardo informed me. There was unused furniture in the castle that would be appropriate, so why not send a few pieces to the temple? It would alleviate the problem of some furnishings taking too long to commission from scratch. Melkor's attendant gave a relieved nod and promptly inquired about what they would need. I visualized the furnishings in my own room. He will be eating lunch at the temple, so the kitchen will need to be stocked and new chefs hired, I said. A closet of some boxes will need to be prepared to store Melkor's clothing. Also some bookshelves and crates for storing documents. Otherwise, he should only need a bathroom and washroom. He will be studying in the orphanage director's and the high priest's chambers for some time, so a work desk and such can come later. The attendant was wearing a serious expression, hoping that Melkor would assist us with temple work was easy enough. But actually preparing a room for him was a lot more complicated. They would need to go through the castle's furnitures and pick out pieces for him. Rosamund, will I be able to eat lunch with you at the temple? Melkor asked. Of course, I replied. Food tastes nowhere near as good when eaten alone. We will need to separate chefs, though. Retainers were given leftovers and could never actually eat with me, so I was genuinely excited about having someone of equal status at the temple. I didn't want him skimping on chefs, though, especially when we had to account for guests, clearly delineate the budget, and send more divine gifts to the orphanage. You could ask Sylvester to send one of the court chefs to the temple, I suggested. A skilled great shrine maiden could serve as his assistant, or we could ask for a referral from an eatery I know. Blue priests are required to provide the orphanage with leftovers, so their chefs would need to make food, even when their lord or lady is absent. Melkor was free to bring one of the chefs he was used to from the castle, but he would need another who could stay in the temple. In that regard, it was better to hire someone new than use a court chef. I continued, ceremonial robes will need to be ordered before the autumn harvest festival, and a bed will need to be prepared before winter. Trying to get through the heavy blizzards that occurred during the dedication ritual to return to the castle is quite a nightmare. Carriages were out of the question, and riding on a retainer's high beast still wouldn't do anything to alleviate the bitter cold. It was therefore inevitable that Melkor would need to spend nights at the temple to participate in the dedication ritual. The silver lining was that reusing furniture left behind by the old blue priests and shrine maidens would make it easier to prepare a room for his retainers. This is getting expensive, Melkor said. Indeed, I replied, we will need to consult the Ob and arrange a budget for the temple. If only we had thought of this earlier during our meeting. Actually, you've timed this well, Hartman said. We need to hold another more targeted meeting with the Ob about the purge having further reduced the number of blue priests in the temple. It was inevitable that some would need to leave due to family circumstances, but there are a number whom we want brought back. I was aware that we had fewer blue priests now, but I was surprised to hear that we'd lost enough to impact the running of the temple. Fewer blue priests meant less mana being offered and less food for the orphanage. It also meant more work for those who remained, and more grace priests and shrine maidens returning to the orphanage. To be honest with you, Hartman continued, the temple has lost so many blue priests that it now lacks the mana to support Ironfest. We could rely on your mana, Lady Rosamund, but that would not make for an abysmal solution in the long term. He was speaking from his perspective as an interim high priest, and always took my future retirement as high bishop into account. I nodded. Dedicating mana to the temple is one of my duties as the high bishop, but doing that at the expense of supplying the duchy's foundation is like putting the cart before the horse. The archducal family is meant to support the foundation above all else, so rather than relying on me, we should prioritize coming up with ways to produce more blue priests and shrine maidens. Lady Rosamund is correct, Hartman said. I expect more nobles to come to the temple and offer their mana in hopes of obtaining more divine protections. He looked in particular at the retainers who shared that motivation, but that may not last, depending on the results of our future research. As he said, we couldn't rely on people who would turn their back on the temple the moment they thought it stopped benefiting them. You know, Hartman, what if we were to treat the children in the playroom as apprentice blue priests? If we use the money confiscated from their parents and get them to live in the noble section, Rather than the orphanage, but they can continue to be treated as noble children, right? Hartman blinked his orange eyes and put a contemplative hand on his chin. He had rejected the idea of taking them into the orphanage before, but now he seemed at least a little bit more receptive. I continued, they aren't even students yet, and will need to build up mana for their lessons, so there won't be much they can offer us, so I consider it better than nothing at all. Though, and it will contribute to hiding them from the searching eyes of other nobles. Hartman began to consider my suggestion even more seriously. The children's room in the castle were already being funded by the money confiscated from their home families in the duchy's budget, so it didn't seem like my idea would require much extra cash. Like me, they would both be both nobles and temple functionarians, I said. And a line will surely be drawn connecting them to the pre-baptism children in the orphanage. Above all else, it would be wonderful if we could educate them now and get them to regularly visit the temple to offer their mana. And that would also, doing the whole prayer thing, that would also help them with getting divine protections once they start going to the academy. Hartman was likely thinking exclusively about the mana shortage, but it would be a tremendous help to the orphanage to assign them attendants and chefs. Plus, if they were educated in the orphanage, the other kids there would have a clearer goal to work toward. I continued, furthermore, the apprentice blue priests and shrine maidens would get to associate with Melkor when he visits the temple. Would that not make it easier for him to protect them from scorn or unreasonable treatment in the next flight at the Royal Academy? I could pull out all the stops to prevent discrimination while I was a student myself, but we needed something in place for after I graduated. If the children in the orphanage do not end up being baptized as nobles, then I think this would also be a good way to give them options in the future. Ideally, the blue priests would be able to live even without support from their houses. If we could come up with jobs for the blue priests or some other way they could support themselves, it would potentially open up a way for Dirk and Conrad to live as blue priests. Maybe even children like Conrad would start being entrusted in the temple. After listening to all my thoughts, Hartman smiled. You seem to have many ideas, but how will you convince the Archducal couple to implement them, when you were just told not to stand out anymore? I won't be leaving the temple, so I shouldn't stand out at all. And as long as I frame all this as a way to reduce the burden on Florencia, I am sure the Archducal couple will accept. But as I clenched my fist in determination, Charlotte, who had just spent our journey thus far staring at her feet, looked up. Were those tears in her eyes? Sister, she murmured, as I said during the meeting, I do not believe you should increase your workload any further. Thank you for worrying about me, Charlotte, I said with a smile, but replacing the blue priests we have lost, increasing the amount of workable mana in the temple, and providing a future for the children of the orphanage are my duties as a High Bishop. Also, remember that you're going to be supporting Florencia. If we can save her even just one job, we'll be helping you in turn. But I want to help you, she replied. It was very cute. In that case, come visit the temple, I said, offering a piece of very stealthy advice. If you do, I am sure you will receive more divine protections next year. She smiled a bit. I intend to hold up in the temple, but I wonder, if I present this as my way of raising our duchy's next generation of nobles, will people view me more favorably as the next first wife? Charlotte cast her eyes down again, her lip trembling. How can you be so positive after being told such cruel things, sister? And why are you still coming up with ways to help Mother? Because I want to spend all of my time between my library and the temple. That was my resolve, but Charlotte seemed completely dissatisfied with the outcome of our meeting. She glared at Wilfrid, her brow tightly knit, and said, Brother, how could you agree with Father so readily? Do you think nothing of us being told to lower Ehrenfest's rank? It seemed that I wasn't the only one who had found his lack of a response strange. Wilfrid glared back at Charlotte, then glared at Melkor and me as well. I hate it, he exclaimed. Of course I do. Father and I both. Excuse me, what? He bit his tongue, then more calmly retorted, I just understand that there are things we need to prioritize more. And with that, he marched on ahead and returned to his room. Y'all can't even hope to do things with the top-ranking judges without taking care of the internal stuff first. Once y'all take care of the internal stuff within your own duchy, then y'all can focus on the top duchy stuff. And besides, Prince Anastasia said that he wasn't going to raise y'all's rank. Sylvester even said, either lower the rank or keep it the same. He didn't say you had to lower it. He said you could keep it the same. You don't have to go down. Charlotte sighed and shook her head. I have no idea what he and Father are hiding, but I cannot agree with them, even if this really is the will of the Lies Gangs. What are we supposed to say to everyone who's been working so hard at the Royal Academy? Wait, my resolve to hide away had cooled my head a little, but now there was something nagging me. The will of the Lies Gangs? Father's stance during that meeting was nothing like what he had said to us at the Ehrenfest dormitory and to Dunkelfelger and the royal family during the energy tournament. He encouraged us. I do not know how I can continue to believe in him. She's right, this doesn't add up at all. It was the same feeling of disconnectance as when I'd spoken with Melkor about divine protections. Sylvester's actions were inconsistent and completely messed up. Something had surely happened between our return from the Royal Academy and that meeting. Charlotte, I said, it may be too soon to lose faith in him. Sister, we're missing something. An important detail. Let's raise our rank and make something happen, yeah. Let's teach everyone to act the way nobles from a top-ranking duchy should. Let's use the purge to get rid of all the dangerous people and unite Ehrenfest. The Sylvester of the past was always saying things to push us forward. He was always ambitious and ready for change, but not the man I just met. It was like the Sylvester at the meeting was an entirely different person from the Sylvester we knew. And as for Wilfrid, he had been the very best when it came to unifying the students in the dormitory and urging them forward. He had worked hard to lead them and rejoiced when they they succeeded. I didn't want to believe that his excitement back then had been for show. The will of the lies gangs, I repeated. I think that phrase is the key to all this. Charlotte watched me closely. Her indigo eyes were desperately begging me to prove that those merciless, soul-crushing words hadn't come from her own family. Let's go to our rooms and see what the lies gangs have to say about this, I said, but Charlotte shook her head. I'm afraid we cannot invite Geeb Lies Gang to the northern building. We don't need to. Now we have Lies Gangs right here with us, I replied, then looked up at Hardman and Cornelius, who had attempted the meeting with us. They were both adults, and neither one of them had attended the Royal Academy this term. Even if they had been busy sorting out the temple's dedication ritual, I was sure they had participated in winter socializing at least to some degree. I continued, I will gather all the Lies Gang retainers to discuss this matter. I want to know what they think of the Ob's reference to their wishes. Do the students agree? Were my adult retainers already aware? Hartman smiled at me and said, then let us hurry to your room. The look on his face seemed to say, I was waiting for you to notice, which proved to me that there was more to all this than meet the eye. Lies Gang awaits to see what decision you will make. Okay, I'm going to have to end this off here, guys. I will see you on the next one.